you're watching something in the background, or you have kids running around, or you're doing a few other things, which I think is actually a nice affordance to be able to do. At the same time, I work very hard, as I'm going to share, trying to make these kinds of experiences rich and as meaningful, or close to as meaningful as if we were actually gathered in a room together, which actually does afford us some new things. But anyway, so you see all of my contact information, and again, as Katia said, you can follow me on Twitter, but I use that in a very again, a blending of the professional, personal, and my portal there will take you to my blog and other places where you can connect with me if you choose. And I really do appreciate the fact that when I'm able to share in a context like this, I inevitably meet new people and discover fellow learners that I can learn with, and they make great contributions to my learning as well. Just a little story here, and I think I saw Susan in the room earlier. Yeah, Susan Spellman, who was part of this little thing that happened recently. I celebrated a milestone in my life a couple of months back, and it was actually Alec and another colleague of mine who orchestrated this little event whereby folks randomly started sending me socks. And the interesting thing was, outside of one pair, this all took place while I was on the road. And my wife, who was sort of in on it and knew it was going, kept taking pictures of people, all these gifts that were coming in. And I didn't quite clue into what was happening at the time. But here there were, at the end of the day, there was, I think, 87 or 89 pairs of socks that were delivered to me from people all over the world. Again, Susan being one of them, and Alec and others. And again, to me, it was a real. I mean, the gift was just the fact that people would think enough to do something like that, and that I had people that, some whom I've never met, and some who I know really well, but a real sort of evidence of the value of networks and the importance of networks, and the fact that the weak ties that we establish online often, again, blur into our personal lives, and we share these moments together. So thank you. This is another way of me saying thank you to Alec, and thank you to Susan and others who have participated in this, and have, again, made my life and my learning and my professional journey a lot richer because of it. So thank you. So here's where this begins, because I think when we talk about a lot of issues, I think we have to kind of come back to what are the driving questions behind why we're doing some of the things we're doing, why we're having the conversations that we're having that may be different than conversations we've had 5, 10 years ago. So for me, the big hairy questions kind of start with, and here's a quote, talking about our learning institutions for the most part are acting as if the world has not suddenly, irrevocably, cataclysmically, epistemically changed, and changed in the area of learning. And again, it's a pretty generic statement, and it kind of comes across a little bit, like people don't get it. And I mean, it's definitely a black and white statement. I don't think it's quite as stark as it says, but it does, again, give us pause to say, to keep asking the questions that the world isn't the same, should schools remain the same? And I think that's not an easy question to answer, but it's definitely one that we have to continually be having conversations about. It's just not simple. And I think, it's interesting now as we see some of the, if you're familiar right now, at least in Canada, and I think in the US and other parts of the world, talking about these math wars about, it's a really interesting conversation about the way we teach mathematics. And of course, there's a lot of argument for the traditional ways in which we learned about computation, and there's that, and then there's another side that says perhaps that's not the right way. And even in that, I find that a really interesting conversation that I think we continually keep having. And part of it is definitely related to the fact that the world might not be the same, and we need to be thinking differently about it. So where a lot of the idea of the social learning began for me started when I did begin teaching here at the University of Regina. And so this was an opportunity that basically Alec invited me and said, hey, we need somebody else to teach. We have some courses that we teach our pre-service teachers. Would you be able to do it? And I was excited to be able to do that. So this started about 7 years ago when I started my first class. And it happened to be an online class, although the other classes I taught weren't specifically online. This was where it was, and that's actually me teaching. I think we were on vacation at the time in the summertime, and it was kind of this neat opportunity to be able to, not worry about where we were and teach. But about 2 months, or maybe a month or so before the class started, I got an email from a student who asked me this question: can you send me all the assignments ahead of time? And I thought that's a good question. And as my involvement and experience with distance learning at that time was really some of the beginnings of high schools that were doing this, and for the most part this was done to accommodate people who had really various schedules. I know in Saskatoon there was a school that did it to really support athletes, student athletes who were, they might be busy doing football, so they wanted to get all their coursework done ahead of time, or perhaps delay it 2 months until that season was done. And so it was a way to sort of accommodate different schedules, and it was, done with all good intention. And so they were there was very much a sentiment around, listen, you can just list all the assignments, I can do them, so that actually the day the course begins, I click submit and boom, I'm done the course. And I thought, well, that's kind of the intent of the online class, but it just didn't jive with me. I couldn't see how this could work because knowing what I wanted to do for a class, knowing what again, never having taught before, but knowing what I kind of was hoping to attain, this just wasn't going to fit. And so I responded by saying, actually, no, what I really want to have happen here is to build and create some kind of a community whereby which we learn with each other, because I think that continues to be one of the reasons why school still works and still is important, is it's an opportunity for people to come together and learn together. And again, part of the mindset has always been, and this is still a pretty current mindset and paradigm in a lot of schools. It's about mind your own business learning. Keep your head down. This is about assessing you as an individual. This is about what you can do. Don't look at your neighbor, eyes forward, all that kind of stuff, which probably a student hears many times in their school career. It's easy to get the impression that school is really about this. Now, yeah, we have group work and there's a project that we do here and there, and that's your chance to work together with other people. But it really, I don't always get the sense that we're taking full advantage of the fact that there's other people here that we could be learning from. And to me, it seems like if you go a whole day without having a conversation, a learning conversation with the people around you, that you've wasted. We've wasted one of the most valuable resources at our disposal. So this is a difficult mindset in many cases to overcome. And as Dave Weinberger says, talks a lot about this. He's the one that I think is quoted as saying the smartest person in the room is the room, and that knowledge isn't in our heads, it's between us. And this idea of social knowing is never finished. And this is why I love blogs, because blogs are about conversation, and they're a wonderful way for people to put out an idea and learn in a back and forth way. And that's what I think learning continues to be, and it's actually not a difficult argument to make that all learning is social. Whether you pick up a book and you read it and you're learning from the author, there's a social interaction. You're trying to glean someone else's ideas and make sense of that. What we have today with technology is the affordance to actually be able to have direct conversation with creators and people that are sharing ideas in ways that we never had before. So it's definitely become more evident. So let's just play a fun little game here to illustrate my point. So don't type anything in the chat room yet. I want you to look at those 6 pictures and do a quick scan, and just type the number of them that you could answer correctly. So from 0 to 6, how many of these do you say, oh, I know them. I know those ones. Just give yourself a second and then type the number into the chat room. Andrew says 0. We've got 1. Donna has 3. Hey, Donna. We have a 4. 4 is a good number. Chris says 4. All right, so that's pretty typical. 1.5. Colleen, that'll be interesting to see how you do that one. All right, so let's just sort of do this jointly. Now, if I was really fancy and I was more comfortable with Blackboard than I have of late, I would actually use the group feature and throw you off into a room in a group, and you could sort of work in small groups to do it. This is normally what I would do if I was working with folks in a room. But anyways, let's start off. So who is the African American woman in the top left? Write down your answer. There we go. Chris is correct in saying that it's Condoleezza Rice. There you go. And the 2 young people in the top middle. Who are they? Oh, look at those. Joanna has got it. Yeah. Okay, so we're on the right track. Charlie and, oh, this is where that, oh no, Andrea says the half. All right, so we're pretty good here. That's your Meryl Davis. And, sorry here, I got something opening on my computer that I didn't want to open. Meryl Davis and Charlie White. So Charlie was pretty good. That's a half. And the gentleman in the top right. There you go. The WikiLeaks guy. Correct. Julian Assange. Bottom left. Bottom left. How are we doing? There we go, Chris. Can we get his name? We're very close. Can we get a name? Yeah, we got the myth. There we go. Young Adam Savage from the Mythbusters. That's one of our Discovery Channel shows that we like to promote and kids love. Bottom middle, KR, the representative of an element, Andrew says. Wow, scientists in the room, Krypton. There we are. And finally, the bottom right. The bottom right we have ticking away. Perhaps an actress from days gone by. And it's eerily silent. And the reason why it's silent is because that's my mother-in-law. And I would probably have been the only person in the room that could have helped you with that particular one. But again, it's a simple little demonstration that
looks like Dean's connection may have just dropped for a second, but he should be right back in, so just hold on tight. Thanks. Sorry for the inconvenience. Great time to get a refreshment if you have a coffee brewing or anything you like there. Just hop and jot down. Here's Dean. We'll just bump him up to moderator, and we should be able to get him up there.
Sorry about that. Crappy internet. I was outside enjoying the sunshine, and now I'm back inside. And now you have to perhaps contend with barking dogs in between, but that's the way it goes. All right. So again, thank you for participating. And again, the idea was this was a pretty rudimentary example. What happens when we bring in the collective and allow people to contribute and learn from and with each other. So again, I love this quote from a video on Learning to Change, that we have a classroom system when we could have a community system. And this is really, again, I think a seminal discussion point. The fact that we have the potential to learn from this wide network of people, both within our classroom and without, and yet we're still busy trying to focus on this idea of a classroom as opposed to community. And it can be a subtle thing to discuss in some ways, but I think there's some really strategic things that we can do to help change that and take advantage of the fact that learning should be social. And this was a quote that some of my students, that a student of mine shared with me a few years ago that I've always kept. And she said this about our class: "I know people in this class better than I do in most of my face-to-face classes." And that was sort of equally, for me, a very high praise, but at the same time I thought not a very good statement for the level of interactions that they were having in their face-to-face classes. And again, this is undergraduates in their experience, and I don't know the sizes, but I also know of all their classes, but I know that not all of them were overly large classes. It's just that the structure was such that there wasn't as much opportunity to get to know one another. And in fact, so these are what have been sort of the tenets of my instruction with students over time, and I've pretty well kept to them. And this is, if you want to call this my philosophy, but this is what I share with my students at the beginning of each term. And I wonder, and as I share the rest of this session, and I really would love for you to get some feedback in terms of how much of this applies to your specific context, because I will be sharing this in my own personal context. Teaching, which is largely online, and I know that not everybody does that, but what I'm hoping is that doesn't, that you make the connection to your own situation. So again, these are the ideas that I share, that I think learning is social and connected, and that we make connections not only with people, but with people outside of us, but also inside, that it's personal, that we make meaning of it ourselves, and that we have some ownership of it. That notion of self-direction means that I get to have some choice. I get to choose how I want to create this. And the idea of it being shared and transparent, again, transparent ties in with the notion of social and connected, that when we share what we learn with each other, that and make it transparent, that there's huge benefits in that. And that, again, with the access we have now to rich media and content, that we should be able to pull out lots of diverse ideas and rich media that we share, that we don't just simply rely on a text-based experience, which probably for most of us was where our content came from, is in the form of text, and that finally it ought to be joyful. Like, that has to be a strong component of it. So again, I think these probably work in all contexts. This was actually a very recent, this is the course that I'm teaching right now. Again, I save this because this is, really what I think is what I'm trying to do. She said this isn't an online class, and she goes on to talk about the fact that she's had online classes before, but there was no connection, and this didn't seem typical. And again, this is essentially me bragging, I guess, in some ways, but it's what I've been trying to do, what I'm trying to create with my students in my classroom. So before I go on too much further, and there's a few people in the room, can you just let me know, so I have a bit of a context, what your instructional context is? Like, what's your role? Andrew's a grader. That's an interesting job. Well, again, lots of varieties here. Lots of people doing support work in terms of working with other teachers. trying to help this one. So please be discerning in the way you're thinking through things tonight, as I just kind of go through some specific examples, and you know, feel free to chime in and say, I don't see how this fits in my context, or again, try to make connections to what your situation is. So let me just share with you some really specific things that I do to try to create this idea of a social learning context. And maybe you have, I would be wonderful if you have other specific things to share, because like so many things, here we go. Question. Oh, hand went down. So go ahead and click again if you have a question, or put it in there. I don't mind. But what I think about this idea of building community, this is an easy word to say, and lots of people talk about it. But like so many things, unless you're intentional, unless you say, here are the things I do to build community, or whatever it is that you're trying to create, I don't know that it gets done. And so these are specific things that I have tried to do and tried to work on to actually really be able to say I have built some form of community. What I would also say about that word community, it's an interesting word, and I think the true sense of community, I don't know that a classroom ever has that. It's tough because of the fact that it's sort of a forced community. I mean, people being put together in the case of what I'm teaching right now, 6 weeks module, that's a very short time. And so for the notion of real community to be built, I'm not sure I could really achieve that. However, I want to at least explore the elements of community and what that has to happen, so that hopefully these young people, when they go forward in their classroom and have a little bit more time and a little more space perhaps, they can really dig into these ideas and again, develop some of their own, and being intentional in creating a notion of community. So the first thing I do to sort of just break the ice, and again, I don't know if this applies in other contexts, and I know Alec has done this in past courses, is create a little course trailer. So I'm going to try to play this in here. Let me see if I can do this. It's always fun to try. See if this works. If not, I'll just put it in here. Okay, I'll play just the first part of it. I'm not sure if you have to click play or whether I do, but we'll play it's about a minute and then maybe 20 seconds into it. All right, I'm pausing it and stopping it just because we don't need to see the whole thing. But again, the intention around that is, listen, I've got students that are coming here that are apprehensive about this course. They don't know who I am. They don't know what this is like. I mean, the whole notion is very foreign to them. And so it's a way to sort of ease the tension. And it's kind of goofy. I mean, I just used a little iMovie trailer, so it's nothing out of the ordinary. It sort of serves its purpose, and it's kind of corny. I get it and all that stuff. But it really was a way to help them sort of feel at ease. And thinking about that, thinking about the students that you have, I don't care if they're kindergarten students. Like, I love the fact, and I don't know how many do this anymore, but I know there are schools where the first 2 weeks of class for the kindergarten teachers is actually going into the homes of their students and getting to know these young people and getting to know their families and beginning that way. And I think that's such a brilliant way to introduce these 5-year-olds and 6-year-old kids to what school is going to be like. Because again, that's a big thing. So I don't care what your context is. There's always a level of apprehension. So what are the ways in which you can, from the onset, get them to relax and eliminate some of the tension that may come with an unknown space or place? So that's one thing that I do, and I try to make a new one. You know, even though if I teach 2 or 3 of them, I might share this one with I think I probably shared this one with my class in spring. I didn't make a new one for them, but But I try to, again, just try to make it personal, try to get them to see, in a very kind of a non-threatening way. Yeah, light and engaging is kind of what I was hoping going for. The other thing that I really, again, and this is really specific to the online, is the LMS, the Learning Management System. I really struggle with using it. I've never felt comfortable using, even if it's Moodle or whatever else, and I know that other people might find those spaces good. I just find them constricting. I find that they're more about management than they are about learning. And while I'm actually teaching another course right now, or I will be in a few weeks, in Wilkes University in the U.S., who uses Desire to Learn. I mean, I find it really convenient for me in many respects. I really have struggled with the way in which it really doesn't fit well for community. So that's been a struggle for me, and again, I've been fortunate at the U of R not to have to use one. Here I just don't use it, Madison, and I think what I'm going to do in Wilkes after I teach it is I'm actually going to do what I do here, is basically give a link saying here's where we're going to spend the rest of the time, and I don't know if that'll work, but I just find it really challenging and stodgy, I guess, in trying to, it's sort of like if you're given a classroom space and you're not allowed to move the furniture around, and you have to sort of work with exactly where the desks are laid out. And again, it's not that you can't do it, it's not that you can't make it work, but being able to move furniture around and kind of make it your own space, I think, is really important for the instructor as well as the students. Because part of it is, and this is one of my, again, probably I could paste this on my own blog or wherever as being what I believe education should be, and what Stephen Downes has said a while back, that we need to move beyond the idea that education is something provided for us and something that we create for ourselves. And so that's essentially what I want to be able to do, is allow them to create for themselves. And to your question, Madison, so is it overwhelming with lots of links? Yeah, it can be. I essentially have three main spaces that they have to get comfortable with. Of late, I've been using Google+. So Google+ is kind of our home base. And then the other one is their blogs and being able to read their blogs. And the third one, to a lesser degree, and again, kind of more for those who kind of get it because it's hard to understand it in a short time, is Twitter. But if you can kind of get comfortable in Google+ and learning how to navigate blogs and subscribing to each other's blogs, that's kind of the only links that you really need. So I've kind of nailed it. I've kind of figured it out in that context. But again, it's about ownership and giving them their own space. And so rather than having them put all of their stuff inside the LMS, they go out and create a blog. And at this point, as young folks, they need to start establishing the idea of an online identity. They need to have a place to store stuff. But again, I think this is true with all students. And there's lots of examples of teachers in the very younger grades who are thinking the idea of a portfolio and a space where they can make things and create things and share things and post things when they want to post them and not wait for something else. And so this has actually been a big shift over the last number of years. So Madison, you're asking what happens when they aren't familiar. Well, a lot of them have never created a blog before. But I mean, with the way that the tools are today, it takes them literally seconds. They might have some struggle in figuring out the nuances and where things goes, but we work together. And so one of the things that I ask them to do is, hey, let's learn how to do this together. But there is a sense of ownership, and some of them really grasp onto this, that they love the idea of having their own space, and then when they're done with the course, they do with it what they want. Some of them don't. Some of them still just want to live in a world where they hand in their stuff to me at the end of the course. That's it. I'm done. I don't have no interest or desire to keep that stuff, but I don't want that. I mean, I want them to be able to say, this is my own space to create and learn. And then thinking about connecting in multiple ways, because not every space works for everybody. So some of my students really love the fact that they can go on Google+, they can leave a comment, they can ask a question, they can press a like button for a very simple, easy way of connecting and communicating, and that's fine. But there's other ways to do it as well. The second thing is thinking about the role of video. And as I mentioned before, again, for most of us, content and learning has always been about text. And even when we ask kids to make an About Me page, they write an About Me thing. But for me, again, it was really important to move beyond this, because it's very, very easy to you know, read discussion threads and not get a sense of who people are. So I asked my students to create short videos about themselves. And I mean, I just love, this is one that one of my students did in the fall. And I'll do the same thing. I'll play it again. I'll throw the link in there, and we'll just watch about the first minute or so here. All right, you get the idea. I mean, again, there's no way that you're gonna be able to build a relationship or get to the notion of community unless you have some opportunity to get to know the people that you're working with. And you know, not everybody is creative as this or whatever, but I mean, that doesn't matter. The fact that people just say, hey, this is who I am, here's what I'm trying to learn, here's what I might be able to contribute, here's what I want to know, all of those things are not just done to me. And typically what happens is we might ask our students to do those things, but we don't do that in a shared and transparent way. And so you get to know them maybe because you got to read a little write-up for them, but why not let them to get to know one another? And so this is a really important part of the course, and I think of learning, is that this learning gets shared with one another. We get ideas from one another. Hey, it's a really interesting way of doing it and getting to know, because I think in this case video does trump text. Another little thing I do, and again, I'm not going to, I'll just share 2 seconds of it, but I give updates to my course with something called Social Cam. And so I just grab it. It's a little app that I use, and instead of writing an update, I just simply go ahead and wherever I happen to be that day or wherever I am, just go do a quick little update. So I'll just pull one here. This was one I did for, this is one I did for the other class I was talking about, the master's course. But you get the idea here. Quick little blurb just to see how it works. So I do this probably once a week with all my students, just create a quick video to say, here's where we're at, here's some of the things I'm seeing and noticing. I find it just easier to do rather than write out as a blog post or something for everybody. And again, I think there's a little bit of an element of a personal nature to this, that they get to see you and see what you're doing, and even if it's full of ums and ahs. In fact, it's supposed to be. I don't rehearse that. I don't sit down. I mean, I might write down, I want to make sure I address these 3 things, but it's not. It's a little bit raw. But I think that's intentional. That's who we are. We're this community, and we're learning with and from each other. And audio also trumps text as well. This is just something I've been doing the last little while, and it just worked really well for me. So for those of you that use Evernote, I use it for a lot of different contexts, but what I have been using it lately for is actually assessment. So I have my students might do a midterm assessment for me. So just how they're doing with the course. You know, 3 simple questions. How are you doing? Or what are you doing well? What are you struggling with? What do you need from me? And so those are essentially the 3 questions. What can I do to help you? And so they often will, and they can type it out. They can do it by video, however they want, but they email it to my Evernote account. And the reason they email it to my Evernote account and not my email is because what Evernote has is, on my phone in particular, maybe pull it up and show you, the ability to record audio. So here is an example. Let me show the video here. So there's one of my students writing me, and then you can see on the bottom there's a note attached because all I did was press the record button, and then you can see it's actually recording up top what I'm speaking right now. And again, when I'm done, I simply email that back to the student. They get an email back with that audio recording of me giving them feedback, saying, hey, thanks for writing this, and here's what I'm thinking. So, and they all said to me, the first time I did it, they said that was such a surprise to hear your voice, because of course they were expecting me to write back with them. And I don't know about you, but when I'm giving feedback like that, I'm constantly thinking about, oh, I don't want to say that, or that's not going to sound exactly right. It's you know, that nature, that idea of feedback can be really a little bit stressful for both parties. And so again, for me to do it in they said it felt like a conversation, which is exactly what I wanted. And as Joe Bauer's tagline on his blog says, assessment is a conversation, not a spreadsheet. That's a good question with the Google. I know Google Docs now has the ability to do audio, so I think you can. But the reason that I liked it with Evernote is because it's mobile, and so I would take my dogs for a walk and actually provide feedback, and the dogs would bark, and there'd be trains going by, all kinds of things. So for me, having it mobile on my phone was essential. And again, I wonder about this even in a non-face-to-face thing, because again, if you're giving feedback to your students, most of you are doing it in a written context, constantly doing it in a written context. I think the ability for them to hear your voice, and of course it means you don't have to necessarily, everything has to be a face-to-face conference, that you can do this and still achieve much of the same kind of personal nature of feedback using audio. So I love that feature. Again, just an example of it. The second thing, again, in this notion of making things social is to be a connector, to actually do this intentionally. The quote by Will Richardson from an article many years ago says that we need to reconsider our roles and think of ourselves as connectors first and content experts second. And the argument that's easily made here is the fact that, listen, unless you are the world's foremost expert in your field, there's always going to be somebody else that knows more. And you're only with them a short time, whatever that length of that course is, even if it's a full year, you're only with them a while. But the ability for you to connect them with experts who they can continue their learning with, maybe not in the same depth, in the same way, that's a powerful gift you've given to them. And it's one of the greatest gifts I give to my students is that I connect them with really smart people. Alec and I actually have kind of used this phrase together because Alec's sort of doing this right now in his course, calling ourselves the lazy professor, because most of the time we're not the ones standing in front of our students. We find people who know usually more than we do. Sometimes they're just different. Sometimes it's just good to hear a different voice, and they share. And the beautiful thing is that there are so many willing people who are just happy to share. And again, the amazing thing for your students is even if they're not sharing anything particularly different than you might, you are connecting them and providing that concept, the idea of connecting with other people. Again, a powerful gift that you give when you introduce them to all the people that you know. And again, I would argue that if you don't have experts regularly Skyping into your classroom, that you're doing a disservice to children, because they're there and they're willing. So when you're reading a book, if you're an English teacher and you haven't at least contacted the authors to find out if they would be willing to do it. There's tons of websites and probably somebody could throw them in a link where authors who will Skype for nothing. This is amazing. If you're studying something in particular, like there are experts who will speak with your students about that, even if it's for 10 minutes. This is just an amazing gift you can give your students. And then actually helping them build a network. So the other thing that I do with my students is I actually have them connected with educators around the world who are willing to sort of have them in their class. And Donna's in here, and Donna has done this with my students a few different times. So this goes beyond just having a guest speaker coming in, but actually having them connect with a classroom. And again, in the context that I'm teaching, these are pre-service teachers who are going to be using technology in the classroom. I connect them with other educators who are already using technology in the classroom, and they comment on their blogs, they might Skype in and teach a lesson, whatever else. But again, the intentional side of building a network. And that slide didn't go together, so I'll just tell you what it's supposed to say. The idea, and this is Michael Fullen's notion, that we need to move beyond the idea of just being a guide on the side, which is sort of the mantra that people talk about, to the idea of being a meddler in the middle. And that means doing a lot of this stuff yourself and getting involved with your students and modeling to them what network learning actually looks like in this situation. Playing together is really fun. I mean, this happens in my course more times than I'd like, but something goes wrong. So we might be in Blackboard Collaborate and somebody can't get on, and so we head over to Google Hangout and we play around there. This just happened to be, I had Michael Wacker speaking to us on using Google, and he wanted to show us something in Google Hangout. My students had never seen it. We jumped over and we did it. So even, again, exploring new technologies, and I know teachers are getting better at allowing students to take over some of the reins and saying, well, we've never used this tool before, we've never used this website, let's go and investigate together, and having an attitude of play around that is really important. In the whole notion of building community, doing something together, this was a video that I did with my students a year ago, and I've done a few of these in the past, and I know, again, Alec has done this with his MOOCs as well, where we've actually created a lip dub with people across the world. And you know what, Donna, since you're here, Donna, because you tell the story so well, would you mind telling the story of this?
Sure, I don't mind doing that at all. I'm just running into the other room here for a second because the family's watching television while I watch your class. 1 second, I'm just going to grab some video here too. Maybe. All right, I'll just start telling the story anyway. Can you hear me okay? Awesome. Okay. So over the years, I've taken several of Dean's students from his course to have in my classes. I've been teaching online for a long time, and then more recently, I've been acting as a secondary school principal. So I was really hoping that I could get some of Dean's students to come and work in the classes where I was principal, because we were breaking into sort of the online environment and using technology in the classroom. So we did have one of Dean's students last year, which was a fabulous experience. And when that student got back to Dean's class, you know, he was saying, you know, I had a great experience, and all of my classmates here in Dean's class had a great experience, but all of those classrooms aren't connected. They don't know each other. So let's do something to connect all of those classrooms. And what they came up with doing was a lip dub. And they chose to do it to the Commander Hatfield song that he played with the Bare Naked Ladies singer, which has escaped my mind right at the moment. But anyway, talking about how the whole world is one. It was a beautiful song. And so all of the classes that had participated with Dean's students each did chunks of the song and sent in their little pieces of the video clip, and Dean put it all together and then sent it back to us. And so we had this huge showing in our school, and it was amazing to watch it because we'd actually never even seen the student teacher that we had. He was just an online presence. So when we started watching the video, we saw, you know, one of our classes, and then we saw our student teacher for the first time, and he was in there with his two lovely daughters singing their part of the song, and then more of our students were on, and it was just such an amazing connecting experience because, of course, my kids had a great time seeing all of the other students who had Dean's student teachers as well. But the best part was that one morning I looked up and I saw the International Space Station go over, and I thought, I wonder if Commander Hatfield is actually seeing this video that we did using his song. And so I tweeted that out, and sure enough, he watched it on the ISS. Fabulous.
Thanks, Donna. Yeah, I mean, again, it was the idea of bringing people together in some respect, and I'm just playing here in the background. You can see kind of a little bit. Some of the, you know, again, it was all over. I had kids in kindergarten, students. I had kids in high school classes from all over Canada and the U.S. There may have been some from here from Asia somewhere. But again, just the opportunity to really sense this idea of being together, especially when you are expanding the walls of your classroom beyond just those in it. How do you actually make those people feel a part of it in meaningful ways? And so I just want to try to be intentional about the fact that there's ways in which we can do this and know that one another are sort of in it together and not these sort of, I don't know, faceless people across the globe or wherever else you're working with them. But part of this, it all starts kind of with an expectation of community, that the fact that this is something intentional, this is something that you need to pay attention to. And I mean, I know this quote is, again, it's contentious. I don't know if I agree with it totally, but there's an element of it I do that says class size matters only if the teacher does everything. And so that's, again, a really important part of what I do. And I think what's important is that this shouldn't just be about teacher. And so how do we, it's not so much about offloading, but it's about just empowering students to participate in their learning beyond just what you can offer them. So here's two questions that, again, I give to all of my students, and I argue that every classroom should have these two questions as part of a class. If indeed you believe that classroom should be a community, start with these two questions. What did you learn from other people? And so at the end of every term, my students have to just write a 500 or 1,000-word essay answering those two questions. What did you learn from other people? Besides me, who were you paying attention to? Who contributed to your learning? And then secondly, what did you do to contribute to the learning of others? And again, this only happens in a shared kind of context. And so what's interesting is that we talk a lot about how to make contributions, and the fact this isn't just about, in traditional classrooms, you might say, well, it's the kid who answers, raises his hand, answers a question, is always doing a lot of talking. Here's where technology really does allow for multiple ways that people can contribute, whether that maybe someone's just really good at photography, they take great pictures, maybe somebody just quietly helps another student in the back of the room. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that this happens, and for me, we talk a lot, like some of the students said, well, we're going into class to learn about technology. I don't know anything. How can I possibly make a contribution? To which my very first, my very first response is, well, when you have a question, that's a contribution. A good question is a contribution, because the fact is that if you don't know how to do something or understand something, the chances are you're not the only one. And so by you stepping forward and saying, hey, I don't know how to do this, can someone help me with this? You've not only raised an awareness of a question that others have, but you've now given someone else the opportunity to answer that question. Because I try really hard not to jump in then and not to be the first one to respond to that, but to allow them. And again, I have to be sensitive because I know there's probably situations where I don't know that others would know that question. But at the very beginning, I say don't email me any questions about this course unless it's of a personal nature. If it's a question about how to do something or you don't understand something, that needs to go to our Google Plus page to give other people a chance. So setting those expectations to me is kind of a big deal. And again, a lot of this comes back to the idea of why school. And if you've not seen Google Helpouts, this is something really new that Google is providing, where you're actually looking at the very specific teaching tools that you can either are free or you're paid for. So asking for very specific help with things. So when you know that kind of instruction is available, again, it makes me think deeply about what is it that I want to create of a personal nature, of a social nature that that makes school a great place to be in. And this was a quote that I pulled from Will Richardson again, which I think really challenges us to think about the way we use technology, that he says it still shocks me to the extent that we dumb down the affordances of web and keeping the system grinding no matter what the obstacle. And again, this is what I'm trying to do, is think about what are the ways in which we can use these interesting tools and spaces and affordances to really come back to the idea that learning should be this idea of social spaces. And as I talk to my pre-service teachers in particular to thinking of them as having to have very, very different roles. And so my role is very different. I don't come across as an expert, and while I have expertise, not that my expertise doesn't matter, I have that, but I have to do more than that. I have to just do more than just know a bunch of stuff. And part of that is connecting them to each other and connecting them to people beyond the classroom as well. So thanks for taking time tonight to listen. I hope there's some ideas that are useful. I'd be really curious to hear from the people in the room if the ideas perhaps didn't quite resonate for some reason, and I'm open to hear that. This is, again, just sort of my story, the way I kind of have approached things and the way I think is really important about being intentional. But again, really interested in hearing from others if they have questions or want to just continue the conversation. But thank you so much for taking time to come out tonight. I do. We talk about those expectations a lot at the beginning, and you know what? It's one thing though to put the expectations out, but the other thing to continue to help wrap their head around it. Because again, I think there's a strong paradigm that suggests, listen, I'll do my work. That kid beside me will do their work. We'll hand it in at the end of the day, and that's how this negotiation will work. So it's difficult for them to get over that hump. But yeah, I do put those expectations out. LMS balance. Hey, I don't want to down the LMS as being the worst thing in the world, but I just think it can be a restricting place. I just haven't figured out totally how to use it. But there are some affordances that I like. Yeah, it's a good starting point. But it can be like coming into a room with desks all in a row and a chalkboard in the one place. It's a good starting place, but at some point you got to say, I got to move some stuff around here. Good question, and that's a really big part, Madison, and it's not a silly follow-up. So I could actually do a whole session, and I have done a whole session on assessment. My students all begin by assessing themselves on everything. So they would assess themselves. This particular term is a little bit smaller because they don't have quite as much going on, and it's only a 7-week course. So there are essentially their blogs or portfolios represent 1. They have weekly tasks they have to do. There's 2, and 3 will be their that 1-page reflection on their contributions of community, learning from each other, contributing to that community. And 4 is a final summary of learning, which is just basically answering the question, what did you learn? And they do it in some sort of a media presentation format. But they assess themselves. That's a difficult thing for many of them to do. It's a difficult thing for me to do because I fight rubrics. I want rubrics to work, but I haven't found a rubric that doesn't seem too restrictive. So rubrics are kind of right now I'm trying to figure out how to make, they're useful. I don't want to say they're not useful, but I think we can over-rubricize everything, and sometimes rubrics don't work. So assessments are difficult. They assess themselves on those things. We talk a lot about how to show evidence, and I want to say that somebody added in Twitter, I noticed too, about adding to my little tenets of learning, and I think it's a great one. I'm trying to find it here, that learning should be evidenced and demonstrated and affirmed. I believe that, yeah, and that's part of the assessment challenges. I don't believe you can measure every learning, but you sure can document it. So, complicated question. Yes, I do, but not often. I would say most of the times they're pretty bang on, because I'm kind of thinking, listen, I'm not going to fuss between an 82 and an 85. I don't have time for that, and I don't think it matters. I kind of think of ballparks. I mean, listen, if you're doing exceptional, fair or good, fair, and otherwise, I kind of have those broad targets in mind, I guess. But I would say on 30 students, I might override 2 of them. Sometimes give them a little more, sometimes give them less. And then I usually come back and say why. Glad to have you aboard, Colleen. Good luck with your presentation. You've got lots of folks here that are, again, willing to stay connected with you. And it's one thing I just tell my students, young teachers, that teaching is way too hard now to go in this alone. And it's a gamble. When you get hired, you don't know what school you're going to. You don't know if you'll have great people you're working with. So one of the ways to combat that is to make sure that you come in with a solid network of people willing to help you. And you know, online spaces are a great way to build them. And it's one of the things I'm hoping my students get. I know that, you know, not all of them totally get that, have an opportunity to do it, but it's pretty empowering. And for those people in this room that understand that or are learning that, it's a pretty empowering thing to know that that network goes wherever you go. It doesn't matter where you are, they're always there to help you. If there are more questions, I am willing to take them. Favorite tools to help students gain confidence? You know, specifically in the course that I teach, because there's a lot of introduction to new tools, and occasionally I have students that really struggle with some of the tools. It really depends. It's the reason why I give them lots of. They experience a lot of different stuff because, yeah, for some of them blogging works is great. They realize, well, this is pretty easy to be able to push content online. They start to think about how they would use that with students. You know, for others of them, you know, they really gravitate to, you know, some of the storytelling tools that somebody like an Alan Levine would share, like really simple kind of things to get them going. I guess what I try to stress, and I think this is both the positive and negative with technology. I mean, there's a lot of tools that are really easy to use, but they're not very interesting, or they're not very, they don't take you into very deep learning opportunities. So easy doesn't always necessarily mean it's good. At the same time, if easy gets you in the game to be able to take it to the next level, to think more deeply about how to use something, then I'm all for easy. That's always a good question, Joanna. You know, I would probably say that I haven't been very good of late at really understanding and giving people time to feel comfortable or not. And particularly in the course I'm teaching now, because it's 7 weeks long, I haven't really even had that conversation. So I would argue that I haven't been as diligent as I should be in sort of checking up with people, saying, how does this feel about sharing online? In the past, you know, when I teach a full semester, I often, you know, can see that in some folks and sort of address it. But I have to admit, I just haven't been, we've just sort of done it, and I don't know if that's, I think it can be good in some respects because it just gets people to sort of dive into the deep end. But I also think I probably could do a better job of being more sensitive to people if they're finding that a difficult thing. It's why I don't make them use Twitter. I make them create an account, but I'm happy to say, listen, don't tweet a thing. Learn how to use it. Learn how to grab, you know, chats and things like that, but don't feel compelled to do it. But yeah, when the idea about posting online, I think part of the thing is that they forget. I mean, and then here's the reality of a blog, right? So they create a blog, and unless they are doing something actively to get other people reading it, the only people that are reading their blog are the people that are forced to read it. You know, and I know that that's the unknown, right? When I put something up there, well, somebody else in the world could read it, which, I mean, you look at that either as, that's awesome, someone can read it, or that's horrible, someone could read it. The reality is no one's reading your blog because you're probably not doing anything to go out and get people to come read it. So I don't know. I need to do a better job at helping people wrap their head around that idea. again, I hope there's some ideas, and I think I appreciate some of the feedback people have given around how this relates to your particular context and some of the ideas. I think that's an important thing to be able to do. And again, I was pretty specific in some respects, but I hope there's ideas that can resonate. And again, to me, the key idea is you need to be intentional. If you want to have this notion of community, if you want to make learning a social experience, you have to be intentional. You can't just say, well, we sort of do these things. Like, I think about the things you're already doing, because you're probably already doing things that make it that are building the notion of community, but add a little bit of intentionality to it. Maybe think of some other ways that you can do it, step it up a bit. And I think you'll start to get students to realize that learning is this social thing, and and again, it goes beyond just, well, we'll do group work projects a couple times a year, and that's our collaboration. I don't even really use the word collaboration a lot, just because I think it's the way that we use it. It's just sort of ingrained into the way the classroom works. So I would like to think that collaboration is happening all the time. It's not a special thing we do. All right, so again, you can contact me anytime you like if you have more questions and want to keep the conversation going. Thanks, everybody.
All right, thanks everyone so much for joining us, and yeah, thanks again, Dean, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow for the core session, and also for, I guess, Dean will see you again tomorrow for the repeat of this session. So if you didn't get enough of Dean tonight, you can join him tomorrow again at 3:45. Is this a surprise to you, Dean?
Oh, a surprise that anybody